She thought she was answering a letter meant to change her life, but when she arrived, all she found was a cold cottage, 4 barking dogs, and a locked door. What she didn't know was that the man who sent for her never wanted a wife at all. Now, before we begin, go ahead and grab that soft, fluffy throw blanket. Curl up on your favorite sofa with a warm cup of cocoa. You're going to want to savor every drop of what's about to unfold. And while you're getting cozy, tell us in the comments, what's the weather like where you are today? Manchester, England, 1888. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It drummed on rooftops, slid down soot-streaked windows, pooled in alleys no one swept. Clarissa Jennings sat in a second-floor room above a tailor's shop, hands still, heart louder than the storm outside. On the table before her, a tin lamp, a needle bent at the tip, and a letter she had read 47 times. The ink had smudged where she held it too long. Still, she traced the words with the pad of her finger. A gentleman of means seeks a respectable woman for companionship and care. Comfort provided, loneliness cured, kindness above all. It had sounded like hope, like air after years of dust, like a man who saw something in her that no one else ever had. She had answered the letter in secret, paid the postage with her last coin, wrapped her courage in a suitcase and climbed aboard the midnight train without telling a soul. Now, the engine hissed into Wensher Station, its breath coiling into the morning mist. Clarissa stepped down onto the platform, boots worn but polished, hat fixed low to block the stairs. She searched for a sign, a name, a carriage with a crest, a man in a coat holding her future. Instead, there was a driver in a plain wool cap and a horse that looked like it hadn't seen oats in days. "Miss Jennings?" he asked without looking up. She nodded. "Come along." He did not take her bag. The ride took them past Greystone Manor. She saw it only briefly, its towering stone arches swallowed by fog, windows blinking like eyes behind lace curtains. But they didn't stop. The carriage veered off the main road, wheels crunching over gravel, branches clawing at the sides. They stopped at a small clearing. There, behind overgrown hedges and a rusted gate, sat a cottage no bigger than the room she'd left behind in Manchester. Stone walls, slanted roof, a chimney that leaned like it wanted to leave too. He handed down her suitcase. "There's a note inside." Then he turned the horse and disappeared into the mist. The door creaked open. Inside it was warm, clean. A fire crackled in the hearth. A kettle whistled low from a hook, and 4 pairs of eyes stared at her from the shadows. Dogs, large, silent, watchful. They didn't bark, didn't growl, only stared like they were waiting to decide what she was. She stood still. Then one, his coat dark as coal, approached, sniffed the hem of her skirt, sat down. The others followed. She didn't move, only breathed, and slowly reached for the folded paper left on the table. Clarissa Jennings, feed at 7, walk at 4, no scraps, keep floors clean. Carter, no greeting, no welcome, no name signed with warmth, just orders, just function, just her role made plain. She unpacked in silence, fed the dogs, lit the fire, washed her hands 3 times just to keep them from shaking. She stared at the note once more, then crumpled it, dropped it into the flames. One of the dogs, she would call him Bramble, laid his head on her foot. She didn't cry, not yet. She sat by the hearth, the sound of the fire louder than the storm outside. She whispered into the quiet, "I came looking for something real, and I won't leave until I find it." The next morning he came. Carter. He didn't knock, didn't take off his gloves, didn't ask how the night had gone. He looked around the cottage, nodded once at the dogs, and said, "You're feeding them too early." Clarissa stood. "I thought the note said 7. 7, he repeated. "Not 6:45. He crouched near Queenie, ran his hand down her spine, didn't look at Clarissa until he was halfway to the door. "I needed someone consistent, not a companion. You assumed more." He stepped out into the cold without waiting for a reply. "Keep the place clean." The door shut. The dog stayed curled on the rug. Clarissa stayed standing, not because she was frozen, but because if she sat down, she might disappear entirely. Consistent, he says, as if I were nothing more than a schedule. A set of hands to open the gate, feed the beasts, sweep the ash from his hearth. No greeting, no courtesy, not even a thank you for the miles I crossed or the name I left behind. Aristocrat, is he? Ha! If breeding breeds that kind of cold, then God help the bloodlines. And he's not even handsome up close, not in the light. Face like polished stone, empty eyes, not a single warmth behind them. A mannequin in a fine coat, a scowl in tailored boots. I ought to leave. Pack what little I brought and walk out that door before he can toss another command over his shoulder. But where would I go? What would they say in Manchester when I returned without a husband, without a dowry, without a name? Clarissa Jennings, the fool who boarded a train and came back with nothing but calloused hands and the smell of dog fur in her hem. He thinks I assumed too much? Perhaps I did. I assumed a man who writes for a bride might at least pretend to be a gentleman. But I'm here now, and I won't be pitied. I won't be sent home like spoiled milk. Let him stew in his silence. Let him watch me feed his beasts with more kindness than he's ever earned. I won't disappear, not for him, not for anyone. The fourth morning came colder than the ones before. Mist hung low across the field like breath held too long. Clarissa fed the dogs, wrapped her shawl tighter, and kept her head down. She didn't expect visitors, but they came. Carter rode ahead. His voice carried before he reached the gate, bragging, boasting. Beside him another man, younger, taller, well-dressed but not flashy, sharp eyes, gold-burnished hair. He didn't smile when Carter laughed. "Purebreds," Carter said, gesturing to the dogs. "They'll outrun wolves. She keeps them alive. That's all I ask." He looked toward Clarissa. Didn't speak to her, just about her, like she wasn't there. "Picked her up from an ad in the papers," Carter added. "Better than a stable boy, less complaining." Clarissa didn't flinch, but she felt it. The heat of humiliation rising beneath her skin, the slow, deep kind that stays long after the cold is gone. She turned toward the porch, back straight, hands steady. She would not give Carter her pain, but the other man saw it. He saw the shimmer in her eyes, the kind that comes not from weeping, but from holding back too much for too long. He didn't say a word, not then. The next afternoon he returned, alone. Clarissa was stringing clothes on a low line behind the cottage. The dogs lifted their heads first. Then she heard the steps. He stood at the edge of the clearing, hat in hand, a brown parcel under his arm. "Miss Jennings?" he asked. She turned slowly. "Yes, I'm Thatcher, Carter's acquaintance." He held the parcel out. "Wool gloves. Yours looked cold." She took them without a word. They were soft, worn, practical, warm. He shifted his weight. "I came because yesterday wasn't decent." The way he spoke, it wasn't right. She said nothing, but her throat tightened. "You don't owe me apology," she said finally. "You didn't say the words." "No," Thatcher said, "but I saw them land." That evening she lit the fire early. The wind had teeth. The stew needed time. She didn't expect another knock. But it came, gentle, hesitant. "I brought a jar of pickled turnips," he said. "I was hoping to trade them for a bowl of whatever smells like comfort." She stared, then stepped aside. "You peel carrots," she said. "I stir." He peeled awkwardly. She tried not to laugh. The dogs circled them like sentries. "Is this how it's meant to look?" he asked, holding up a shredded stump. "You're not bleeding," she replied. "You're ahead of most." The kitchen filled with warmth, not just from the fire, from company, real company, not Carter's words thrown across a room, but presence, quiet, steady. They ate at the small table, wood worn smooth at the edges, spoons clinking gently in porcelain bowls. "Are you staying here?" Thatcher asked. Clarissa set her spoon down. "I don't have another place to go, and I won't go back home with empty hands and no name." "That's not shameful," he said. "It is to the people I'd have to face." He nodded, not in agreement, in understanding. She passed him a second helping. Their hands brushed. "Thank you," she said. Not for the carrots, not for the stew, for seeing her. Over the next days he came again, not to visit, to witness. He brought a better kettle, a book of poems, a scarf the color of ash and twilight. She never asked. He never assumed. He just came back. But kindness isn't shelter forever. Clarissa knew that, and after a week of almost peace, she folded the scarf, closed the book, and asked the maid at the manor to send word. She wanted to speak to Carter, one final time. He arrived late, gloves still on, eyes already looking past her. "You're leaving then?" She nodded. "Very well. I'll have someone send your compensation. You were functional. And the dogs? Ms. Bigley will see to them, or not. Honestly, they've always been more Thatcher's type." A pause, a smirk. "He's always been soft about strays. I suppose he helped you walk them out of charity." She said nothing. "Don't mistake his kindness for affection," Carter added. "He likes governesses, quiet, educated women who know Latin. You are not his type. Good day, Miss Jennings." And he left her with his words still burning in the air. Later that day, Thatcher came, not with promises, just a carriage. She took only her case. The dogs followed her without a word. The carriage moved west, wheels murmuring over frost-hardened roads. Neither of them spoke, not for lack of things to say, but because certain silences are the only language worth keeping. Clarissa watched as the scenery unfolded. Trim hedgerows gave way to wild fields. The land stretched wider here, like a lung exhaled for the first time. The estate came into view, not ostentatious but dignified. Set upon a gentle slope, its gables edged in ivy, a conservatory glinting at the rear like a private cathedral of glass. The guest house stood just beyond the orchard. Whitewashed, with tall windows and a slate roof, it looked more like a promise than a place. Smoke curled from its chimney. The fire had already been laid, and beside the hearth, someone had thought to place a porcelain dish for the dogs. Queenie circled the sitting room once, then sank onto the hearthrug as though it were familiar. Bramble nosed open the cupboard door, tail swaying like a metronome. Clarissa lingered at the threshold. She wasn't afraid, only uncertain whether peace would recognize her if it came. Thatcher unhitched the horses himself, waving off the groom who came from the stable yard. Inside, he lit the gas sconces along the walls, low and steady. The flame cast a soft glow across the room, like candlelight without the trembling. He carried nothing but her silence. He left her trunk for the housemaid, and when she looked at him, truly looked, she saw no rescuer, only a man who knew how to make space. He visited often, but never unannounced. He knocked each time, even in rain. He brought kindling when storms rolled in, and a basket from the kitchen when the baker had been generous. He didn't ask how long she intended to stay. He never reminded her of the guest house's true purpose. He just came, and left, and came again. Sometimes with the newspaper folded under one arm, sometimes with a story of the dogs as pups, sometimes with nothing but a quiet air about him, like a man who had learned to listen more than he spoke. The dogs adored him. Bramble followed his boots like a loyal footman. Queenie observed him like a dowager duchess, dignified, but not without affection. Clarissa began to write again, not letters, not supplications, but thoughts, fragments, lines that sounded like truth when the fire was low. "This is not what I imagined. It is better, because it requires nothing but my presence." She didn't weep often, but one morning the fog hung heavy and the tea went cold in her hands. Thatcher didn't speak. He only placed his glove beside hers on the table, not touching, not presuming, just there. "You are not a burden," he said, "even if someone once made you feel as though you were." She looked at him, and her throat tightened, not with sorrow, but with relief, the sort of relief that lives quietly in the ribs, unnoticed until someone lets you set it down. She stayed, not because she lacked an elsewhere, but because at last she had found a place that asked nothing, yet gave everything. Thatcher never announced it, not to Carter, not to the village, not even to his own staff in formal terms. He simply informed Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, that a guest would be taking up residence in the Orchard guest house for a season. She'll need privacy, quiet, and no questions. Mrs. Holloway, a widow who had once buried her own grief in rooms much like Clarissa's, only nodded. The linens were aired. Tea was delivered each morning by a maid who spoke only when spoken to. The guest house was technically separate from the manor, its own entrance, its own garden path. Enough distance to satisfy decency, close enough to offer warmth. To society, Clarissa Jennings had disappeared, returned to Manchester, or moved abroad. Carter never corrected the assumption, perhaps because he had made it himself. To those within Thatcher's estate, she was a quiet companion of unknown relation, well-spoken, reserved. She kept mostly to herself, wrote often, walked the orchard with the dogs, and slowly the silence she carried began to bloom into something else. She didn't share meals with the family at the manor, not out of shame, but because Thatcher respected her space. He dined upstairs, hosted his acquaintances, attended his duties as any landed gentleman should. But each morning when the maid brought her tea and warmed the fire, a folded note would sit beside the tray. "The roses bloomed by the stables. I thought you might like to walk there. There's a novel in the library I think you'd enjoy. Yellow binding, far shelf. Should you wish to join me for piano, the room is warm this evening." He never insisted. He only invited. His presence was quiet, never showy. A well-cut waistcoat, gloves always neatly folded before he entered a room. A gentle bow when they passed each other in the orchard, hat in hand. He asked questions like a man used to silence, not afraid of it but willing to trade it for truth. "What was your favorite season in Manchester? Did you ever learn to ride? Do you still dream when you sleep?" Clarissa found herself answering slowly, like someone learning a language they'd nearly forgotten. But what she did not know was that each question held more than kindness. It was study, quiet, patient study. Thatcher watched the way she folded linens, whether she hummed when no one listened, how she reacted when the lamp flickered or a dog barked too sharply. Did she anger quickly? Did she forgive? Did she let silence fill a room or rush to cover it? He never judged, only noticed. One afternoon, he left a basket outside her door. Inside, embroidery thread, 3 colors. He wanted to know if she'd mend the tear in her apron or leave it for someone else. She mended it, neatly, without mention. He observed the books she finished and those she abandoned midway. The former were quiet tales with stubborn heroines. The latter, grand romances with too much sighing and too little bread-making. He smiled at that. She liked her stories like she liked her life. Honest, and with work to be done. Some evenings, he left her books. Other times, small pressed flowers between parchment. Once, a delicate brooch shaped like a leaf. He left no note, just placed it beside the sewing she'd forgotten on the settee. When he spoke, he did so with the kind of sincerity that felt rare in men of his standing. He didn't flatter. He noticed. "You have a way of making stillness feel full. The dogs rest easier around you. That's not a small thing." Clarissa never quite knew how to respond. So often she didn't. But the quiet between them began to feel less like distance and more like understanding. There was no talk of promises, no whisper of intentions, and yet something was growing, not rushed, not pursued but present, like ivy climbing slowly, gently toward sun. The staff never questioned her. Perhaps because they saw how Thatcher looked at her when he didn't think she noticed. With respect, with gentleness, and something else, something waiting. She hadn't expected to be moved from the cottage, but one morning, without fanfare, Mrs. Holloway knocked on the door. "Mr. Lane thought you might be more comfortable in the east wing," she'd said, as if commenting on the weather. "The guest house grows damp this time of year." Clarissa had hesitated at the threshold, but the staff didn't treat her like an interloper. They called her Miss Jennings. They folded her linens with care. No one spoke of it as anything more than natural. But late that night, when she opened the wardrobe in her new room and found a pair of gloves, her gloves carefully mended, she knew Thatcher had remembered. The invitations had gone out weeks prior. Cream vellum, gold-pressed ink, sealed with the Lane crest, an oak branch woven with laurel. The occasion? A harvest gathering, a charitable affair, a gentleman's gesture. But beneath the social polish, whispers stirred. Thatcher Lane, the ever-private, ever-proper bachelor, was hosting a ball. Something had changed. The hall had been swept to its corners. Crystal chandeliers burnished with oil. Every banister gleamed like pride itself. Musicians from Brighton were brought in by carriage, violinists who played as though heartbreak were an art. By dusk, the estate gleamed with warm light. Laughter echoed from terraces. Silks rustled like wind-stirred leaves. The smell of roasted chestnuts and oranges steeped in clove filled the corridors. Clarissa had not planned to go. She had no gown, no station, no place among jeweled ladies with practiced laughter. At least, that's what she believed, until she saw the box. It sat on her dressing table tied with a sky-blue ribbon. No note, no fanfare, just a quiet promise, waiting to be opened. Inside, a gown of dusky green, stitched with silver thread. Modest but regal, a dress made not to impress but to belong. Clarissa opened the box with trembling fingers. She held the dress to her chest like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. Later, as the maid laced the back in quiet, practiced motions, Clarissa caught her own reflection and stepped back. She barely recognized herself, not because of the gown, but because of the way she was standing, straight, like her heart had remembered something her mind had forgotten. "I don't understand," she whispered, eyes never leaving the glass. "Why would he do this?" The maid didn't stop tying. She smiled softly into the mirror. The guests were already deep in their waltzes when she arrived. She did not walk in through the main foyer. She descended from the upper staircase, meant for private guests, meant for family. The hush began halfway through the orchestra's third piece. One by one, faces turned, and at the foot of the grand staircase, Carter stood with a drink in hand, half laughing at something vapid, until he looked up. He froze. There, descending in green silk and candlelight, was a woman he did not recognize, not the girl from the cottage, not the servant he had spoken of with smirks and shoulder shrugs. This woman moved with calm, not confidence, something older than that, worth. He leaned toward Thatcher, brow furrowed. Who is that?" he muttered. Thatcher didn't answer. He only stepped forward. Clarissa reached the final stair. He extended his hand, and for the first time in a room full of people, he held hers. Not out of politeness, but possession, not of her, but of the moment they had built in silence. He turned toward the guests, voice steady. "May I have your attention?" Silence fell like snow. "You all know me. You know I am not a man given to speeches or sudden sentiment. But tonight, I have asked you here for more than music, more than wine." He turned to Clarissa, his voice lower now, but clear. "I asked you here because I have found the one thing I never thought I would. A woman not of noise, but of strength, not made for display, but for depth." He paused. He took a breath, then said, "Ms. Jennings, I know this might come as a shock, and perhaps you're feeling a little overwhelmed. I wouldn't blame you. But what I'm about to ask means more to me than I can rightly express, and I want you to know, truly, that you don't have to give me your answer now. I've always considered myself a patient man, but these past weeks, watching you, learning you..." He smiled then, nervously, as if his words had gotten ahead of his breath. "There's so much I want to say, more than I could possibly say in front of all these people. But Ms. Clarissa Jennings..." He lowered his voice, and everything around them hushed. "Would you grant me the honor of becoming my wife?" She stood frozen for a moment. The music, the gowns, the golden chandeliers, they all vanished. Only his voice remained, and the hand that still held hers, steady. Her throat tightened, her eyes filled. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a breath. "I didn't know. I didn't think..." She stopped, tried again. "You've been kind to me, so kind, and I kept wondering why. No one's ever..." Her voice broke. "No one's ever seen me. Not really." She looked at him now, eyes full, lips trembling. "And then you asked me if I would marry you, and I thought..." She laughed through a sob. "How could I ever answer anything but yes?" Her fingers tightened around his. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." The room didn't erupt, it breathed, because joy, when it's real, doesn't shout. It settles, deep and warm, like home finally found. Across the room, Carter froze. The glass in his hand tilted slightly, forgotten. He didn't blink, didn't move. His Adam's apple bobbed once, a sharp, visible swallow, as if the truth had lodged in his throat and refused to be ignored. The woman he'd dismissed as beneath him was now being asked in front of everyone to be someone's everything, not just someone. Thatcher. He didn't drop the glass. He held it too tightly now, as if letting go might mean admitting what he'd lost before he ever knew it was his to lose.